we on? Just stand here and talk. Hello, hello. We're off to a great start.
How we sounding now? There I am. There I am. Nick, do you have the clicker? Yeah. Thank you, sir. Got me. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing? All right. I'm sure you guys have had a great week. I am very excited to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to get to come and speak to such a group of enlightened people. As you can imagine, some of the folks that I talk to on a daily basis are nowhere near as in tune with environmental issues and conservation as you guys are. So you guys are a breath of fresh air to get to come and speak to. Again, like Nick said, my name is Brad Young. I'm a certified wildlife biologist. I currently work for Allen Engineering and Science. It's an environmental consulting and engineering firm based out of Jackson, Mississippi. We work with organizations such as Mississippi Soil and Water Conservation Commission, USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, National Park Service, doing all manner of environmental compliance and mitigation, everything from threatened and endangered species to wetlands to cultural resources, kind of the gamut of what we call NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, which is a really long, roundabout way of saying for a wildlife biologist, I spend a lot of time sitting behind a desk, like looking at a computer screen, typing, writing reports, all that kind of stuff. But once upon a time, I was that guy up there on the far left. That was a lot more interesting than what I am now. I got my undergrad here at Mississippi State University in wildlife sciences. I got my master's through the forestry program in forest ecology. I don't know anything about forestry per se as far as cruising timber, but I did work on stream ecology projects throughout Mississippi. So I finished in about 2001-ish, thereabouts, and when I finished, I had no job, I had no real prospects to speak of. I was kind of wandering the earth, sleeping in friends' houses and kind of crashing on couches and things like that, and I saw a job posting for a biologist position at the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. For those of you who don't know, the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science is a division of the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. It houses the non-game and threatened and endangered species biologists within the department there. So, I thought it would be interesting. So I went and interviewed for it, and Charles Knight, who was the head of the research coordinator at that time, and Liddy Hartfield, who was the director of the museum, sat me down and they said, Brad, here's the job. All right, we estimate that there are currently about 12 to 20 black bears in the entire state of Mississippi. And what we want you to do is to go out there and trap and radio collar all 12 to 20 of those, and then follow them around, gathering data so that we can learn about black bear ecology in Mississippi. There was no information at the time about black bears in Mississippi or what they meant. And so, I grew up in Mississippi my entire life, and I had heard of, a bear sighting here, or maybe one that got hit by a car somewhere, very random and sporadic. But as I stated before, I was broke, homeless, had no job, so I was like, yeah, heck yeah, I'm your guy. I can do that, no doubt about it. I had never actually worked with bears before, but my work here at Mississippi State, I worked on several projects doing radio telemetry, which is radio tagging and tracking animals ranging from squirrels to wood ducks to white-tailed deer to, just kind of you name it. So that experience, kind of got me in the door and sort of, got me the job. And so, like I said, the confidence I had at the time, or at least what I sold them on, was that, we can trap these bears, no problem. Well, for those first few months, I did not live up to my end of the bargain, I promise you. I did not trap a bear, I did not see a bear, I did not come anywhere close to a bear during those months. So I realized pretty quickly that, 12 to 20 animals in an entire state is beyond needle in a haystack kind of odds. It was time to pivot a little bit. But luckily at the same time, we also kind of came to the realization as we started talking about bears, and this was in 2002, so that was the 200-year 100th anniversary of the Teddy Roosevelt hunt at that time. And so it was a growing interest in black bears in Mississippi. And so as we talk about that, you know, it was amazing kind of the gap in understanding of that there had ever been bears in Mississippi, that there were any bears in Mississippi, and then number three, why would we want bears back in Mississippi? Like literally, when I would tell people that I was a bear biologist, they thought we were dealing with grizzly bears in Mississippi. That's just, you know, kind of the way of thinking. So we realized pretty early on that we needed to kind of educate people here in the state about bears, talk about conservation, talk about the role that they play. And so at the time, I traveled far and wide, speaking to groups like Envirothon, speaking to kids groups, talking to Rotary clubs, talking to, you know, church suppers, you know, whatever the case might be. If they asked, I would come. So I spent a lot of time walking around talking about bears and the role that they played. Now, amongst this group, I can talk to you guys about ecology and the natural, you know, the natural place of bears in Mississippi, and you would gather that. I can just tell by looking out at these faces, y'all are an enlightened group for sure. But I'm here to tell you, 99% of the rest of the world does not share your level of knowledge about ecosystems and wildlife management. So we had to find some kind of common ground. It wasn't enough to talk about why bears are important to the ecology of Mississippi. We had to touch on something else that people could relate to. And so a big part of that was the history about bears in Mississippi. All right, and that is embodied in this book right here called The Bear Hunter's Century, written by a guy named Paul Shorey. It gives an overview of the lives of 10 or 12 of North America's greatest bear hunters. These are guys like, you know, most of you probably heard of. What most people would not realize is that 5 of the 10 or so people written about in this book are famous bear hunters because they hunted bears right here in Mississippi. Once upon a time, it was black bears that put Mississippi on the map. Mississippi today, of course, as far as wildlife management, is known for quality deer, duck hunting, turkey hunting, things like that. But back in those days, it was bears. It was black bears that really made Mississippi famous. Guys like Ben Lilly hunted bears all over North America, but spent time in Mississippi hunting bears in the cane breaks of the Delta. He eventually went kind of nuts and ended up sleeping in trees for the rest of his life, but that's beside the point. Robert Bobo owned a large plantation in Oklahoma County along the Mississippi River. Robert Bobo would actually just go hunting for literally 3 or 4 months at a time. Take a big group with him. It was a big social occasion, you know, kind of like a fox hunt in England or something like that. But they would just go hunting. Back then, there were no laws, there were no regulations on what you could and couldn't kill. So they just killed everything. And when we read, Robert Bobo was sort of responsible for the decline and almost extermination or extinction of bears in Mississippi. He took along outdoor writers of the day who went back and wrote articles about all the wild game that was still left in Mississippi, particularly in the Mississippi Delta. You have to think around this time, you know, the forests were being cleared, people were moving, they had taken up most of, you know, the land east of the Mississippi River, but they wrote stories about all the game that could be found in the Mississippi Delta. And so literally people read these stories and just invaded the place, like came in, and as I said, there were no laws, there were no regulations, they shot and killed everything that walked or crawled at one time or another. So in a strange way, he kind of led to the demise of bears in Mississippi. Ray Hampton, in a similar manner, he was a former governor of South Carolina that retired to a plantation in Mississippi. It said that Ray Hampton, in his time in Mississippi, killed over 1,000 black bears. 1,000 black bears. So you imagine, he went from him by himself killing 1,000 to down when I started the job, we were like a dozen. So this guy was lethal, to be sure. And of course, Holt Collier is probably the greatest bear hunter that ever lived in North America. Holt Collier spent his entire life hunting black bears for subsistence, but also guiding hunts for people like Ray Hampton and Robert Bobo. But of course, his most famous hunt was the 1902 Teddy Roosevelt hunt. And the story, of course, being that the president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, wanted to experience a black bear hunt on horseback that he had read so much about and heard so much about. Teddy Roosevelt was one of the greatest conservationists this country has ever had. And he knew that the opportunity to do this was dwindling. The land was being cleared. The animals were being, you know, hunted almost to the brink of being eliminated from certain areas, including Mississippi. So he wanted to come and experience this one last time before it was all gone. So his guide on the hunt, Holt Collier, put the president out the morning of the hunt. Holt turns his dogs loose goes. The dogs run the opposite direction, away from the president. The president says, well, so much for that. Goes back to camp, eats the sandwich, whatever. Well, the dogs, this whole new, they really turned the bear and ran it back across where the president was supposed to be, but he wasn't there. The dogs bathe the bear. There's a big fight, big melee between the dogs and the bear. Hope, realizing that the president wasn't there, like anybody would do, just rode up on his horse and hit the bear in the head with the butt of his gun. Tied a lasso around it and dragged it out of the swamp and literally tied it to a tree. Goes back, gets the president, and presents the president of the United States. Hey, Mr. President, here's your bear. Have at it. The president, of course, being a sportsman, is not going to shoot some half-dead bear that's tied to a tree. So he politely declines, thanks, but no thanks. So, of course, the word of the story gets out. And a cartoon is drawn called Drawing a Line in Mississippi, showing the president turning away from this little bear that's flaccid right there. And, of course, you look at that bear, that looks more like Mickey Mouse than it does a black bear, but that was kind of the point. So the story gets out, it was published in newspapers all over the country, and a toy manufacturer at the time saw the cartoon and wrote the president a letter asking if he could name these small stuffed animals he had been making Teddy's bears. And so the rest is history. The most popular children's story in the entire world started in Sharkey County, Mississippi, along the Mississippi River. Every one of you in here has had a teddy bear in your life. Don't lie. I can point out some of you that still sleep with one, but I won't. But the point being is that, again, we're talking about the history of bears in Mississippi and how important they are not only to the natural ecology of our state, but the history of it as well, and what the culture of Mississippi has to do with black bears. So that was something that we almost lost. These bears were almost completely wiped out of Mississippi entirely. So that was something that we really tapped into in trying to kind of drive that message home. But while we were giving all these speeches and kind of traveling the Rotary Club circuit and eating green beans and chopped chicken, there were also more and more bears showing up in Mississippi. They were starting to come around. We were seeing more tracks. We were seeing more sign of bears, people getting sightings across some roads, things like that. Prints here and there. It just kept going and going. So we knew that the population was gradually beginning to rebound a little bit on their own. So it offered us the opportunity to get to actually trap them. And of course, the invention of the trail camera was a complete game changer. A motion-activated camera set up in the middle of the night over a pile of corn, and lo and behold, there's a bear on some guy's property. It was always funny. Somebody would get one of these trail cameras for Christmas, go set it up, and get a picture of it, and would call and be like, "Hey, you never guess what I got a picture of." Like, well, if you're calling me, I bet I can guess. But go ahead. It's a bear. I took this picture of this bear. Coming to my bait pile. Okay, that's great. He's like, yeah, I thought it was cool too. So when are you coming to get it? Like, why would I come and get it? They're like, it's a bear. It's got teeth and claws. I got grandchildren. I can't have that. The message I always tried to make was that bear probably lived on your property for years, and you never knew it was there until you dumped a pile of corn and put a camera set up on it. And it just happened to show up right after that. So the point being is that, you're talking about something that is an extremely shy and secretive animal. They go out of their way to avoid people, and it takes a giant pile of corn and a trail camera sometimes to actually find them. But like I said, this was encouraging because now this meant that we might actually get to trap some bears. And that's what I kind of really signed up to do. So, what do we use for bait? Donuts. Of all kinds. All right, they're not picky. They don't prefer jelly-filled or glazed or anything like that. They love donuts. Everybody loves a good donut, and so do black bears. It's a cheap, inexpensive. I would just go somewhere and get the leftovers that were being thrown out, and we would use those as baits. The smell of a donut. Any of you that work in an office know if somebody comes in the office and opens a box of donuts, people are like prairie dogs. They'll start sticking their head out of the doors and running down there. The smell of a donut carries a long way, and for an animal that can detect an odor in the air from 5 miles away, you can imagine this bear that walked around and found that bag of donuts was like, oh, yes. All my life, I finally found a tree that produces donuts like acorns. I've hit the jackpot. So that's where we would set traps at. Establish these bait lines, the baits that we get hit, that's where we go back and set traps. So the old traps that we used, I don't think my lens, you can barely see it, but anyway, behind Anthony Bauer there, and by the way, that's the current program leader for the department, Anthony Bauer. He's doing a great job doing the black bear program. But also in that picture down there, you can see that big barrel. That's called a culvert trap. So named because that's actually a piece of culvert. Go figure. So the bear would walk into the back, he would pull in the bag of donuts or the bait, whatever it was, and the door would slide down and the bear was caught. So the traps work great, very safe, very humane, no problems there. The problem was for me, I had to drive and check that thing every single day because there was no way we didn't have these like real-time cameras and monitoring systems and all that kind of fancy stuff. So I'd drive up there and the door's down, I'm like, yes, it's a bear. And I look inside, dang it, it's a raccoon, crap. So you have to open the door, let it out, clean it up. But now Anthony has actually developed a trap that you can watch in real time. So he can actually sit on his couch at his house, watching this bear come in the trap and then drop the door behind it. That is cheating, okay? After doing this for 12 years, that is nothing short of cheating right there. But it really is, it's an ingenious setup, how they do it, because it allows you to trap the bear when you want to, you know exactly when it went in, it doesn't have to spend a lot of time in there. You can pick and choose what you want to close the trap on. So yeah, Anthony has developed that and has done a really, really good job. And you can see the bear's like, wait a minute, I know there was a door back here at one point. But yeah. So, after we get the bear in the trap, what are we going to do? I've told you guys that, they're not mean or aggressive or anything like that, but I'm not getting in there by myself either, all right? I went to Mississippi State. I'm not stupid. So we're going to immobilize it, right? We're going to sedate it using very safe drugs. I don't even know what the name of the ones. We used to use some stuff called Tilazol. Anyway, so you inject the drug into the bear, about 5 minutes or so, bear knocks out, completely asleep. Now you can start your what we call a workup. This is where we're really kind of learning data about this individual bear that we can then extrapolate to learn about other bears in Mississippi and populations and things like that, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Of course, we start by monitoring the vitals. Once the bear is in your care, it's your responsibility to take care of it. So TBR stands for temperature, pulse, and respiration. That's what we keep an eye on throughout the process. We give it supplemental oxygen, and then we apply a radio collar to it. All right? The collar is probably one of the most important parts, or at least it was back when I was doing it, because the collar, today's collars have built-in global positioning systems built into the collar. In the old days, back in my day, we had to put a radio collar on it, and all the collar did was just send off a frequency, which meant that I had to ride around and get close enough to the bear to hear that beat, and then triangulate where it was, and that was one point on the map, and that was it. But it was still better than what we had before. This collar has a built-in GPS unit into it that takes a reading on a program schedule, anywhere from every 1 hour to every 4 hours to every 12, whatever you set it at. So you can imagine, think of all the data. If that bear wears that collar for 2 years and it's taking a GPS coordinate every 4 hours, how many data points that is, showing you exactly where that bear goes. Think about the things that we can learn from that. Things like habitat usage, home ranges, habitat preferences, food preferences, all those kinds of things that we never knew about black bears in Mississippi. We learn all of that coming from those collars. Then we apply ear tags. Obviously, the ear tags are just to identify the bear. If the bear were to lose its radio collar, we can look at the tags, know which bear it was. We extract a tooth for aging. I know it sounds bad. It's not that bad, though. It's just like a little tiny nub of a tooth. It's not even really a real tooth anymore in black bears. So the reason we pull that tooth is because this is how we age the bear. And the way that you age a bear is the same way that you age a tree. Okay? I'm sure all of you in here have looked at a tree that's been cut down, and you can count the rings inside of that tree to tell how old it is. That's because for every year of that tree's life, it goes through a dormant period, right? In winter, it drops its leaves, it kind of shuts down for the winter. And every year of a bear's life, it goes through a dormant period too. And that's what most people call hibernation. So it leaves a growth ring inside of the root of that tooth. So you can take the cross-section of the root of that tooth and put it under a microscope and actually count the rings inside of that tooth. It takes all the guesswork out of it. Black bears can live to be 25 or 30 years old in the wild. So you can imagine there's a lot of guesswork. Me just looking at a bear and saying, oh, I think he's 12 years old. No, I don't have a clue how that bear would be. This is the scientific way to do it. And of course, obviously, you only have to do it once. Then we take a hair sample for DNA. This allows us to kind of establish family trees, establish lineage lineages, genetic information, which bears are related to which, who's dad, who's son or daughter, whatever the case might be. It gives us a lot of information because remember, we were building this program with just a very small handful of bears. So to be able to capture this information year after year after year, our database grows and grows, and as the bear population builds from the ground up, so does our knowledge about bears in Mississippi. And of course, we take blood to determine general health of the bear, physically examine markings, and then a pit tag. A lot of you, if you have dogs or cats, might have one of these. It's like a tiny microchip that's inserted underneath their skin between their shoulder blades. It works kind of like a barcode at a grocery store. All right, we give it to all the bears that we capture, but it's especially important for cubs, which we'll talk about here in a minute, because we can give this pit tag, and if we have no other way to identify this bear later on, we have a scanner we can run over it, and when it picks up that tag, it throws up a serial number, so we know which bear it was, where it came from, how old it is, all that kind of good stuff. So that's our complete bear workup. So then we also do what's called a den check. All right, putting radio collars on female bears allows us to track them into their dens in the winter. Okay, in the hope that they will have cubs that winter that we can also tag, measure, weigh, do all that kind of good stuff. Female bears in perfect habitat conditions have cubs every other year, so we're able to time it out and know which female bears are likely to have cubs and which are not. So we actually track them down to the den, which can be everything from a very large hollow tree to a stump on the ground to just a simple ground nest. Looks like a giant bird nest, which I'll show you in just a minute. We, of course, obviously we tranquilize the female before we go in there and grab the cubs, again, in Mississippi State. So we do that first, obviously, and then change out her collar if need be, change her tags, and then we work up the cubs, giving them the same kind of workup that we do on the adult bears, which we just talked about. So in talking about denning, though, just to kind of clear this up, a lot of people call this hibernation, but it's not. A true hibernation is something that occurs in like little tiny mammals like voles and chipmunks and things like that, where they literally hover just above death. Their heart rate slows down to just almost nothing. Their breathing goes down. Bears do the same thing to an extent, but nothing close to that. Like they can be aroused very, very quickly. Trust me, I know from experience. So when you walk up on that female at the end, she's awake. She knows that you're there. So you can see in some of the pictures, Anthony squatted down next to that giant nest right there. Those two at the top right are in that cavity of that tree. So in most cases, like I say, we can actually tranquilize her in the den. And this is a cool video that we took. You can see how far above the ground we are, and then looking down into the cavity of the tree. So don't forget, that's a 250 or 300 pound female bear that just poured herself into a hole in a tree. So you imagine, they're almost like octopus. They can like squeeze themselves into any area. But if you were a bear, it's a pretty cozy spot. Get up in the tree. And it's an adaptation to flooding as well. In the Mississippi Delta, where it's flat, very low sea level, they pick these higher elevations to den in so that they won't be affected by floodwaters. That's why they don't den in the ground in a lot of cases. Sometimes, though, they don't always stay in the tree as long as you want them to. That's me on the rope over there, and that's a very upset female bear that came out of the tree. So if you look to her left side up at the top, see that little piece of pink? That's the dart that I shot into her, and she was like, yeah, that's enough of that, and came out of the tree. And so, as you can imagine, that tree got really small really fast. And so I had to swing around one way. But the point being is that she didn't have cubs. Usually if they have cubs in the den, their instinct is just to huddle up and cover up those cubs and protect them. She didn't have cubs, and she just didn't feel like dealing with me that day. So anyway, she knew I was there, obviously. If she wanted to swap me around like a tetherball, she could have. But it just goes to show you that they're not naturally aggressive animals. I mean, I was literally from here to the other side of this podium from her, and she had no intention of trying to hurt me. She was just nervous and scared because I was up there with her, and that's why she came out like that. I keep that picture up on my wall at work to remind myself that not everything goes as planned. And so When they come out of the den, usually in about early April or so, and you watch her back left leg, you'll see the cub fall down right there. Let's watch that again. But look at the size of that stump that she was inside of. I mean, that's like the most perfect bear den ever. So, I'm talking about some of the things that we learned about bears in Mississippi that we didn't know before. You know, there are a lot of questions, and bears, of course, black bears have been studied to death everywhere from Alaska to Canada all the way through most all of the continental United States. But that didn't tell us what we needed to know to be good wildlife managers of our population in Mississippi. So, in typical fashion, most of our bears are black with a brown muzzle. You hear about bears in other parts of the country that are blonde-faced or cinnamon-faced, things like that. We don't have that here. The closest we get to that is that because it's so hot here in Mississippi, they will shed that outer coat of that thick black fur, and what's left is kind of this weird fuzz on them that makes them look kind of brown. But they're really almost, we call it some that are almost bald. It's really weird looking. But yeah, they can be almost bald. Like I said, they can live to be 25 or 30 years old in the wild. That white patch on their chest is called a blaze. That is a lot more prominent in the southeast than it is in anywhere else in the country. And a lot of our bears in Mississippi have that very distinct blaze. It's like a big V, or sometimes it looks like a heart painted on their chest like that. 3 feet shoulder and 6 feet long. That's pretty typical. Bears in other parts of the country, Canada, get to be much, much larger than the bears that we have here, although our bears get very big too. The biggest one I ever worked up, in that picture on the title slide, that guy was like 440 pounds. And I know that Anthony has worked some in the time he's done it that were over 500 pounds. That's a lot of animal. Like 500 pounds is a lot of bear, for sure. And talking about diet, this is something that a lot of people are always asking me about, is what is it that they eat? Well, what surprises most people is that they are almost completely vegetarian. 90% of their diet is some kind of plant material, acorns, berries, grasses, leaves, things like that. The protein in their diet, call it that other 10%, most of that comes from insects, actually, big insectivores, all right? Or carrion being something that's already dead out there. They are a walking stomach, make no doubt about it. They will eat almost anything that they come across. But the point being is that they're kind of lazy. All right, they're not going to chase something down and tackle it or stalk it like a cheetah in the Serengeti. No, it never happened. Now, this time of year, if they were to stumble on a white-tailed deer fawn, yeah, that would probably become lunch, no doubt about it. But they're not chasing a deer and running it down or anything like that. So that's something that is kind of a misnomer for a lot of people, is just how, especially our bears here in the southeast, how much they are actual herbivores. And so I want to show you this. Hope you can see, look just above that bear. See that cloud above it? Those are yellow jackets. That bear is digging up a yellow jacket nest and trying to dig it up. Now, I don't know what a yellow jacket larvae tastes like. It must be the most delicious thing in the entire world, because that cloud of yellow jackets over, you can imagine the beating that bear must have taken just to dig up and eat those few grubs that were in there. So in talking about some more of the research, and especially some of the things that Anthony is getting into now, right now we're in a phase in Mississippi where we're trying to determine how many bears there actually are. There have been a lot of questions about the possibility of a hunting season, or the possibility of relocating bears to different areas within the state to rebuild those populations. So one of the ways that we do that is using hair snares. It's a very non-invasive way to get a population count. So instead of us trapping the bear and then tranquilizing it and putting a collar on it and going through all of that, you can set up one of those bait sites and then put barbed wire around it. When the bear enters it, he leaves some of his hair on one of the barbs. So you can take that and then run DNA on it. So obviously you can tell individual bears how many of them visited, at different sites, how often they are. The number within a certain time period gives you an estimation of densities, and that ties into population projection models. This is what all of this has been building to all these years, from the start of those 12 bears that they wanted me to go out and capture in radio color, to now we're at a point where we're trying to build a true population model here in Mississippi to know how many bears there are and what does the future hold. We know we have this many now, but how many will that be in 5 years? How many will that be in 10 years, 20 years? At what point do we start thinking about a possible sustainable harvest? At what point are we going to run out of habitat in a certain area? What other programs do we need? What do we need to do to be good wildlife managers? And of course, like we said, all the information that we collected on litter size, mortality, all the data that we collected, all of that gets factored into this population model. So the two of them work together, okay? So in going forward, where is it headed? The two main goals will always be research and education. Education in Mississippi and everywhere about living with bears, how to coexist with bears, what it means to have bears will always be a top priority for the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and Anthony. That's always going to be something. Research, working with Mississippi State to develop those population models, to look at those densities in the years to come will also always become a priority, and that's becoming more and more of a priority every year. Anthony has done a great job of promoting black bears in Mississippi, using social media, using podcasts, using all kinds of the tools at his disposal, all of that to reach as many people as we can. Again, you're always trying to overcome those stereotypes about, teeth and claws and children being snatched in the night, that kind of thing. And then, like we talked about that new population estimate with Mississippi State, that's going to be a really big deal in the years to come, and we look forward to seeing that. So, with that was the end of my slides. Does anybody have any questions? Nick, I don't know how much time, if we have any time. I didn't do that good of a job. Surely somebody's got a question.
And then the work that biologists do to bring that back, it's really neat to see. And I know a lot of you are very interested in wildlife and habitat management, and I'm sure Brad's going to be around here afterwards if you'd like to ask him some questions. So feel free to find him. Next, we will have the special excuse me, hang on. I'm going to announce Team 1 to the stage. Give me just a second. This is not an envelope I'm opening, but a cell phone, but it's very similar. Order of top 3 presentations. First is Team 2621. They may have come across a group of black bear or yellow jackets. If you could bear with us just a second, we will get that team up. What's that? But yeah. Would you bear with us just a second? We're going to be about 3 minutes. We got a little bit ahead of. I would ask that you please remain seated. Don't try to leave. They will be here soon. Yeah. While we're doing this, I'd like to introduce our judges for this afternoon. We're glad to have these folks here, and they have all been a big part of this competition and conservation in general throughout our state. So as I call your name, would you please just stand up and say hello to the crowd for us? First of all, we have Mr. Paul Rodrigue. Mr. Rodrigue is a retired NRCS employee here in Mississippi. We're glad to have him. Next, we have Mr. Gary Blair. He is the president of the National Association of Conservation Districts. Mr. Brad Young, you just heard from him. Brad, we're glad to have you here. Dr. Beth Baker from Mississippi State University. We're glad to have her. And then Natalie Segrist is here. All of these folks have been a great partner in conservation for various different reasons, and so we're glad to have them as our judges today, our VIP judges today. I would also like to take the opportunity again to thank our sponsors for this week's event. It takes a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort, and so we're glad to have those. We've got some of our sponsors in the crowd, so we just want to tell you again, thank you for putting your financial means to this type of program. We know that it will make a difference in the future of not only the young people that are involved in it, but the folks that they have the opportunity one day to affect as they go out into their careers. So I tried to drag it out. Okay, I got something I want to do with y'all that I've been wanting to do all week and I never got the opportunity. So I don't know if this is a nationally recognized thing, but in Mississippi, when we learn how to spell Mississippi, how did you learn how to spell Mississippi? All right, wait. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, right? So I would like us to do this as a group because we love Mississippi, and I hope you've had a good time here in Mississippi this week. So if we could, give us all the correct way to say Mississippi, right? M-I, hump. No. Crooked letter I. Crooked letter I. Humpback, I. M-I, crooked letter I. Crooked letter I. Humpback, I. We're a little different here in Mississippi, I know. That's how we learn things. So how do you learn how to say your state's name? We're going to be talking tonight at the closing session, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank my staff, our staff here in Mississippi. They have worked tirelessly this week. If you see them sleeping on a park bench or something this afternoon, that's because they just couldn't stay awake anymore. We have stayed up late, we've gotten up early, and it's all for you, and we're glad to do it, but we are tired. And so I want to thank them so much for what they've done. All the volunteers, all the folks that made this happen. I'd like to ask Mr. John Estes to come up here and help me just a second, because I know he doesn't want to get up. We're going to do our drawing from career night the other night. So I'm going to ask John to reach in here. There's snakes in there, John. Reach in there, spin them around, kind of take your pick there. Let's pull out a team. Oh, a person. All right, let's see who we've got here. Angelina Zhu. Did I say that right? Zhu. Angelina Zhu. Come on down. Here, hold this. All right, we've got 3 more to draw here. Our next winner is Marcus, team 2631. Marcus, come on down. Our third winner is, I can't read that. Nalina Dutton, is that right? I got close enough. Come on down, get your card. Yep. And our last and final winner is Nick Ivy. No, that's not right. Man, Sydney Molman, team 2616. Come on down. Well, without further delay, remember, in life, as you go through life, be adaptable. It's very important as you go through life, and so I just wanted to give you an example of that. But we're going to go ahead now and bring out Team 2621. Come on out.
Hello, Shared Future Community Partnership. We are here today to advise a water quality presentation about your watershed, the Pascagoula River. I'm Chase Schmidt, your water and wildlife management expert. This is Seth, your hydrology and aquatic ecosystems expert. That's Sienna on the end, your forestry expert. Emily, your community and outreach specialist. And Anna, your agronomist and economy expert. So as I mentioned, The Pascagoula River is a pristine watershed and one of the best and undammed water bodies in the lower 48. It's actually the largest, and it houses many threatened and endangered species in it, and it has a low amount of pollution. But before we get too far down the stream, let's float past our table of contents. The Pascagoula River is one of the largest water bodies that's undammed in the lower 48, as I mentioned. And this makes it a primetime wildlife watching area. Many species, like the dusky gopher frog, the gopher tortoise, the Mississippi sandhill crane, and the Gulf sturgeon, rely on it as critical habitat. Also, the Louisiana black bear and the red-cockaded woodpecker call it home. This area is an important economic factor as the coastal estuaries provide oyster and shrimp marshes for fisheries, and it's also a popular salt and freshwater fishery. Apart from all this, it sounds awesome, but by developing the land, you could put this ecosystem at peril. Developing land causes non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution is pollution that comes from a non-single identifiable source. It can be a golf course and the fertilizer from that golf course. It can be heavy metals and oil from the parking lot. We cannot determine, and it's hard to regulate where it comes from. So it's important that it starts at home. Apart from limiting our effects on hydrology, we need to make sure that we're reducing our fertilizer use and picking up our pets' waste. But in a community, there's much better ways to impact that. We could use least impact development and best management practices to reduce our effects on our watershed. Some of those impacts, but we believe this is the best way to go about managing your watershed. But before we get too far down, Emily is going to take it over and show you the current site conditions.
Currently, this 745-acre plot of land set for development includes timber, forest land, wetlands, the upper portion of a small watershed, and agricultural fields and pastures. This area also consists of soil types of the fine sandy loams, characterized by moderate drainage, high erodibility, and moderate runoff potential when saturated. With these factors in consideration, the shared future community partners plan to develop a new community with 300 acres of residential areas, a 247-acre golf course, 148 acres of recreational areas, and a 50-acre urban area. Within these residential areas, each house will have a separate septic system for wastewater treatment. Stakeholders involved in this new development are recreation users that require safe waters, chicken and cattle farmers that are wary of new regulations, members of the forestry industry, such as the warehousers, who are willing to be involved in non-point source pollution prevention practices as long as their current timber practices are not impeded, existing community members who are concerned about rapid development, business leaders who are interested in tourism growth, future homeowners that prioritize affordability and recreational activities, the local city government, and the Greene County Board of Supervisors. Without a best management practice plan, all of these stakeholders stand to lose much more from non-point source pollution than they hope to gain from development. We can ensure that through simple implementation of these BMPs, we can ensure that the assets and land usage priorities of all stakeholders are preserved.
As Emily mentioned, much of this land is classified as wetlands, which means they're subject to federal regulations according to the Forestry and Watershed Management Planning Guide. These regulations include minimizing the amount of roads and vegetative disturbance, and we've kept this in mind while developing this plan. Additionally, the watershed is not currently impaired, meaning it is not listed under 303D section of the Clean Water Act as an impaired water. It is essential that we keep water quality standards high so that stakeholders don't lose their support or faith in this process. Additionally, because the water is not currently impaired, it does not qualify for Section 319 funding of the Clean Water Act, meaning we'll go over funding avenues later. Finally, it's important to know that Mississippi regulates water as a natural public resource that must be protected, and that Mississippi is a non-point source pollution voluntary management state, meaning that any regulation or any BMPs we want to implement are optional, and that we must maintain community support when going through this plan.
When beginning site planning, it is imperative to take into account local characteristics of the land, such as topography, climate, and soil texture. The 745 acres owned by the shared community partnership is characterized by gently rolling hills with fine sandy loams and high infiltration rates in their soils. The slopes on the hills are not steep enough to significantly impede construction, and this will help to minimize sediment pollution caused by development as long as development follows the natural contours of the land. The sandy soils will also support septic system installation, but we still suggest frequent monitoring of these systems to ensure that groundwater remains clean and uncontaminated. The sandy soil also provides habitat for many native species of vegetation, such as big bluestem, Indian grass, and switchgrass. This vegetation is well acclimated to Mississippi's climate and pests, and thus will not require significant amounts of fertilizer, herbicide, and pesticides. By using these and similar plants, we hope that costs of including these will stay low when we use them in landscaping projects along meridians, cul-de-sacs, walkways, lawns, and parks. The vegetation will also help anchor soil into place and prevent stormwater runoff from impairing local watersheds. Also, the vegetation will provide urban wildlife habitat, which is specifically important for pollinators and insects and detrivores. It is also important that before development, we get a good understanding of baseline conditions, so we suggest partnering with local governmental agencies, such as the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality and USGS, for water quality monitoring. There's also a nearby community college that has programs in green infrastructure, and so we hope that they would also collaborate with us in creating a monitoring plan that will monitor baseline conditions in the Okeechobee Creek.
When developing this plan, low-impact development was at the forefront. We planned to implement shorter and narrower driveways and roads, cul-de-sacs and community developments, and sidewalks on only one side of the road. This will limit the amount of impervious surfaces we have and therefore reduce the amount of nutrients and sediments ending up in water systems. Additionally, we don't plan to develop within 150 feet of any nearby waterways and increase that distance whenever possible, as per regulations provide. Finally, we realize that local ordinances can oftentimes impede low-impact development practices, like when roads have to be wider for emergency vehicles. It is absolutely essential moving forward that we find the balance between urban function and environmental conscientiousness.
With plans like these, significant public outreach is essential for success, and the earlier the better. We recommend that as you develop this site, you not only build houses, but you build a community. Public polling and focus groups should be conducted to evaluate support, and concerns should be advised as they arise. We recommend assigning an outreach and education professional to educate stakeholders on the practices, benefits, and trade-offs of this new development.
Now, we've been talking about best management practices and low-impact development. According to the Mississippi Regulatory Framework, best management practices are voluntary practices that reduce water pollution. And as per the EPA, low-impact development, or LIDs, are an approach to land development that works with nature to manage stormwater runoff at its source. We plan to use both of these throughout the project.
In suburban areas, we plan on using a variety of best management practices and low-impact development strategies. These practices include rain gardens with cisterns, bioretention ponds, green walls, dry bioswales, septic system maintenance, and outreach programs. To start off, rain gardens and cisterns can be used on or near lawns to capture stormwater runoff from gutters and other sources or in other areas where runoff is high. These rain gardens help provide habitat for insects, like I said earlier, and they are important for maintaining soil quality in lawns. The green walls use vegetation to reduce drop erosion and can also improve aesthetics, which increases property value. Dry bioswales and bioretention ponds work similarly in that they use vegetative filter strips along depressions with native vegetation with overflow drains for heavy rainfall events. These LIDs slow, store, and filter runoff before it ever reaches surrounding waterways, which is critical in maintaining the Pascagoula watershed's status as a pristine watershed. We also advise septic system maintenance biannually to catch leakage and breakage early to prevent groundwater contamination. For outreach programs, as Emily said, they can be used to inform homeowners on non-point source pollution mitigation strategies, such as how to properly store, apply, and dispose of lawn chemicals.
For the golf course, we plan to build it on the contour, reducing erosion, tillage, and the movement of soil. By doing this, we can prevent soil and the pollutants it carries from entering nearby waterways. We will also line the fairway with native vegetation, allowing for water filtration and creating wildlife habitat. Next, for the grass, we will use insect-resistant turf. This will reduce the need for pesticides, limiting pesticide-based pollution. And finally, we will use bioretention ponds. These ponds will store runoff stormwater, preventing pollution while also creating wildlife habitat and adding additional challenge to the golf course.
Establishing recreation areas that promote both sustainability and accessibility is important to us. So we suggest implementing walking trails that both follow the parallel of the river and don't cross with bridges, and implementing native grass plantings along with gravel parking lots. By making the walking paths parallel to the river, this ensures that wildlife habitat stays connected, preventing habitat fragmentation and therefore preventing genetic isolation. Species like the dusky gopher frog and the black pine snake rely on this ecosystem, and maintaining connected ecosystems ensures the natural flow of genes. Secondly, planting native vegetation benefits these species even more, as many of these species rely on these native plants to find food and habitat. And finally, our third main point, planting or using gravel in parking lots at trailheads. This will ensure better groundwater infiltration and reduce the impacts of flooding events during large storms. And on top of all this, the canoeing group will benefit the most, as this will maintain the pristine streams, connectivity, and increase accessibility.
In the urban areas, we plan to implement stormwater planters. These planters can filter runoff from up to 2 acres and will blend seamlessly within the urban landscape. We also plan to implement curb breaks and vegetated medians in areas with large amounts of impervious surfaces, like parking lots. These medians and curb breaks will allow runoff to filter into infiltration zones rather than straight into stormwater sewage systems. All 3 of these BMPs will allow there to be additional green space within the community, and that is a forefront of our stakeholders' concerns.
The effectiveness of any best management practice is only as great as the involvement of the community surrounding it. Community members can contribute to non-point source pollution prevention and mitigation by participating in local polls, focus groups, and education opportunities. They can also assist with vegetation selection, planting, maintenance, and keeping drainage areas blocking free. This promotes the continuation of these practices, as well as creating a more connected, involved, and knowledgeable community. Remember, non-point source pollution begins at home, so prevention must too.
And building off of what Emily said, community outreach is absolutely essential when maintaining these BMPs. One of the trade-offs that come with BMPs is that they oftentimes require lots of community involvement for their upkeep. So we recommend the community starts a volunteering group for regular maintenance and that they apply to the Rotating Water State Fund in order to provide additional assistance for those maintenance procedures.
After development, long-term monitoring should be conducted to ensure that BMP implementation was a success. The Mississippi Forestry Commission conducts water quality testing every 3 years to measure BMP success. This should help to reduce the cost of our long-term monitoring approach. We also would like to consider or continue collaborating with local governmental agencies as well as the community college to track pollutants such as sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus, heavy metals, detergents, fecal coliform, and pathogens. By performing this monitoring, we can ensure that we have had no adverse effects on the Pascagoula watershed, and if the site has damaged water quality, we can have adapted practices and reevaluate BMP implementation and management.
Expanding beyond the town to the rest of the watershed, we would like to take a look at the surrounding forests and logging industry. Currently, the forest is dominated by second-generation pine stands. For management practices, we recommend thinning and/or prescribe burning. Doing this will create open space, prevent hardwood erosion, and allow for the regeneration of longleaf pine. By creating open space and allowing young trees to come in, we can diversify the forest stand creating stability. Also, we recommend that these new trees be managed and regenerated for longleaf pine, as longleaf pine is less susceptible to fusiform rust than the currently dominant loblolly pine. Also, by regenerating loblolly pine, longleaf pine, we can recreate the once dominant longleaf forests of the South.
Ensuring that our forest management practices are preserving and conserving our areas and making sure that we're enhancing them, not reducing them, is important. Through this, we can enhance soil, water, and wildlife health. And this can be done in a variety of ways. One of the best ways to do this, as Sienna mentioned, is prescribed burning. Prescribed burning puts more nutrients into the soil and reduces acidity of soil, as pine needles are very acidic. This in turn promotes a better understory growth, and from there, it allows for better wildlife habitat for species like turkeys, deer, and bobwhite. All these species benefit from it by brooding, nesting, and just overall loafing area. On top of all this, water quality will be improved as well in the long term, as less large wildfires will put less ash into the water, polluting it. This is a key example of natural resources being managed with the environment, ensuring that we not only create a healthy community, but a healthy ecosystem as well.
Local agricultural producers are important stakeholders in our plan, and we value their right to farm. Local agricultural producers are allowed to attend community outreach program meetings and are encouraged to participate in voluntary non-point source pollution mitigation strategies, with cost sharing provided by the Environmental Quality Incentives Program.
Now, this may seem a bit pricey, so let's do a price breakdown. Low-impact development designs are often far cheaper than remediation designs later down the road that come associated with water quality issues. And BMPs are often far cheaper than costly wastewater treatment of impaired waters. For example, the golf course reduces the use of pesticides, the urban areas reduce the amount of wastewater treatment through infiltration practices, the recreational areas increase property values, and the suburban areas decrease the amount of money needed for lawn care. It is always important to remember that proactive measures are oftentimes far cheaper than reactionary ones.
If these best management practices in the new development plan are sustained with the help of the stakeholders and community, future generations will continue to have safe recreational activities, safe drinking water, and most importantly, safe homes. Current stakeholders and community members will also benefit greatly from these implementations.
In the end, throughout the town, we plan to implement BMPs and LIDs like ponds, rain gardens, swales, and vegetation. Also, to the greater watershed area, we recommend best management practices for forestry and agriculture. By implementing these practices, we can ensure the health of the watershed, keeping this vital resource preserved for future generations as we implement this exciting and new community.
In this presentation, we have highlighted a key number of areas that we can help fix this watershed and prevent any further impacts from development. We have highlighted the key issue or current issue of non-point source pollution and how the problems that it can cause. Thank you all. Are there any questions?
Okay, I've got the mic first, so I'm going to start. So what are you going to do? And I heard a lot of great things. Great job, guys and ladies. Great job. What about the pets of these homeowners that are going to be within your subdivision? And those pets are going out on the lawns, and I didn't hear any mitigation factors for collecting fecal matter from pets.
Yes. For these practices, we would ensure to educate community members about picking up pet waste and making sure that they're disposing of waste properly, because education ensures that all community members are aware of non-point source pollution as well as practices they can implement to prevent it.
Also, many of our low-impact development strategies will help catch runoff, which would inherently reduce pollution loads to nearby streams, because it'll allow fecal matter to infiltrate into soil. Well, it wouldn't end up in waterways. It'd rather be used up by plants through nutrient uptake and decomposing.
We can also make sure that they're at our recreational areas. We can post signs and make sure there are waste bags available for people to use.
I really enjoyed listening to, your talk of how the ecosystem would work around the project. Did you come across or provide any information about invasive species and mitigation or prevention of introduction of invasive species, which is a big deal here in Mississippi?
The forest is currently facing hardwood encroachment, which isn't necessarily invasive, but we do want to maintain the natural pine forest. So by thinning or prescribed burning, we can remove these and we could also do herbicide application, but thinning or prescribed burning would be the least detrimental way to the environment.
And we also plan to do native grass plantings. And this ensures that, or to plant those grasses, we need to make sure that there's no invasives in the area because they could outcompete those grasses. So removing species like kudzu, alligator weed, and those other just invasive plants in the area will really benefit those native grasses. Like Seth mentioned, the big blue stem, switchgrass, and Indian grass.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful presentation. What was one of the main challenges you ran across as you put the plan together?
I think some of it is there's so much you can do for BMPs. We didn't have enough specs of the community to fully develop individual things that would need to be used for each house or for each acre of land. So when we were developing these BMPs, these are very general BMPs that we'd like to use, but further development down the line, as Seth was saying, assessing and maintaining is of absolute importance when evaluating a plan like this, and we would be willing to revise any of these BMPs to specify them to specific locations.
Another challenge that we sometimes had to deal with is sometimes community support isn't always 100% for some of these practices, specifically if it's on or near their property. And so we hope that through community outreach programs, people can really start to appreciate the natural beauty of some of this vegetation and really appreciate how much it's really doing for their community and how it benefits the entire watershed, not just them.
So part of the specs was to include a golf course, and golf courses are large green spaces that oftentimes can contribute to nutrient pollution and eutrophication for downstream areas. What would be your plan to ensure that your golf course was aesthetically pleasing and valued by golfers, but at the same time work to reduce or limit the impact from maintaining a golf course?
Like planting the native vegetation along the fairways, it doesn't necessarily always have to be turf grass, but doing this would filter out water, and then also making sure that these plants we're planting are groomed and well maintained. This will make these look aesthetically pleasing.
Also, for the water course, or for the golf course, we can use water from bioretention ponds for irrigation. And we would also we could do soil sampling to determine that nutrient loads are calibrated for specific areas of the golf course to avoid over-application, which would lead to nitrogen and phosphorus potentially ending up in our water bodies.
So what does the phrase that y'all used, and it was the topic overall, of "it begins at home" mean to you after doing this presentation?
I think personally it means that from the very beginning, even before you've laid the first brick of your house, you can keep watersheds in mind, keep our water quality in mind, and by doing that, that helps us keep our future in mind, it helps us keep our community in mind, and it helps build up those relationships with the environment that we can prove that urbanity can survive in conservationist mindsets.
And showing also that it begins at home creates a sense of ownership over this area. If you see an article about this in some far-off place, maybe another state or a different city in your state, you're not going to take as much ownership. But if you're living in a community like this, it really does create that sense of well-being and like a care for the issue of non-point source pollution and how you're changing and affecting it.
Also, for it begins at home, non-point source pollution management doesn't have to be big BMPs or like grand government plans. It can just be picking up after your pet, reducing fertilizer, controlling when you water your lawn. It just, if everyone does that, we can really stop the problem.
I've got one more question, and it's about the endangered species gopher tortoise. So a gopher tortoise basically is like a gopher. It builds burrows and goes into the ground. And so when you're developing a golf course or you're developing this subdivision, what are you going to do about all these gopher tortoise burrows that are existing out there in the natural environment on this property?
Developing in phases will prevent open dirt, and in doing this, we can also check for gopher tortoise burrows, making sure that we aren't burying them under construction and construction equipment.
And that has the additional benefit of reducing sedimentation because you're developing in a specific area where you can really maintain or build roads at a certain time. And so it has the additional benefit of increasing water quality as well.
Also, just like Sienna kind of briefly mentioned, avoiding them overall is really the best way to help preserve their habitat and protect the species and keep them off the endangered species list.
What would you say is the single most important word related to any 9-point source plan?
I would say education, making sure that everybody knows that it's happening and the effects it can have on them personally. That can really make sure that people will get involved in preventing it or stopping it.
And then I would say involvement. After you're educated, you have to be involved and willing to make the change to increase water quality.
All right. For our second team, we're going to be just a minute. If you want to take a quick break. If we could take a quick break, if you need a bathroom break real quick. I don't want everybody to get up, but if you're in need, this is be the time to go real quick.
second PowerPoint.
If you would, find your seats. We're going to start in just a minute. All right, so next we have Team 2610 to the stage.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire Skinner, and these are my colleagues, Saya, Iris, Angelina, and Danica. And we are incredibly excited to have been invited to work with the Shared Future Community Partnership to build a better future for us all. Our focus today is on the Pascagoula River Basin. In addition to the Pascagoula River itself in the southern portion, the river basin also includes a number of headwater streams in the northern area of the basin. These streams are small but mighty, and pollution that enters in headwater streams has the capacity to cause massive impacts downstream. This is especially concerning in the Pascagoula Basin because the Pascagoula River itself is classified as an outstanding resource water. This means that it is valuable to communities both near and far for resources such as recreation, fishing, and swimming. So where do we come in? The Shared Future Community Partnership is looking to build a new community in the upstream area of the river basin, near the confluence of two major tributaries. This proposed community will include residential, recreational, and commercial areas. While this wide variety of focus areas is a positive thing for the economic development of the area, it comes with some associated ecological concerns, especially with regard to water quality. For example, sedimentation from development and runoff from impervious surfaces may cloud the water, smother fish eggs, and decrease both the health and aesthetics of the Pascagoula River. Despite these potential challenges, we believe in your vision, and we want to work to help you build a better future. We want to prioritize a future where the waters of the Pascagoula continue to run clear and plentiful, making recreation like paddling and fishing accessible and rewarding, as well as bringing in tourist revenue. We want to prioritize a future where wildlife is abundant, from the Gulf sturgeon in your rivers to the red-cockaded woodpecker in your diverse longleaf pine forests. A future where outdoor recreation is a priority, not an afterthought. Most of all, we want to prioritize a future where you are at the heart of your community. After all, this is your watershed, your hopes, your visions, and ultimately, your future. I've said the word you a lot today, and I want to pause and clarify. There are a number of interest groups at play within this watershed, and while each is unique with their own priorities, we've categorized them into two major sections. The first four interest groups that you see on screen are in the watershed area as the larger watershed area. These groups want to prioritize the lives they've already lived, not the new development necessarily. And for these groups, recreational users, agricultural producers, the forest industry, and existing locals, we want to ensure that we at least maintain and at best enhance the resources they're already using, such as rivers, forests, and the rural character of the Pascagoula watershed. The final two groups, business leaders and future homeowners, are more directly associated with the area of proposed development. For these groups, we want to enhance their quality of life, as well as attract more revenue from tourism. You can keep all of these groups in mind throughout the presentation as we continue. In order to meet the goals of these interest groups, as well as our own, we have a simple three-step proposal for you today. This graphic provides an illustration of our proposal. Each of the three concentric circles is associated with one part of our plan. The central circle, the focus area, will be discussed by Iris and Saya shortly. We'll spend the most time here because this focus area is where most of our development is taking place, and as such, it's our highest priority. Iris and Saya will tell you about action steps you can take, structures and structural BMPs that can be built, and how these structural BMPs and action steps can benefit soils and aquatics areas. Next, Angelina will expand into the Pascagoula watershed as a whole in that green circle. She'll tell you about working lands, how we can use fire management to improve forestry, and wildlife that can benefit from these management practices. Finally, part 3 of our proposal encompasses long-term strategies for sustainability. These include monitoring, outreach and community engagement, and how we plan to measure our own success. I want you to keep that graphic in the top right corner in mind throughout this presentation. You'll see it pop up repeatedly, and each part of the concentric circles will orient you to where we are within our presentation. And with that, I'll hand it over to Iris for part 1 of our proposal.
Thank you so much, Claire. The first part of our plan is situated within the area of interest itself, and it includes two components, action and structure-based recommendations. Currently in the plan, it contains residential plots and a 247-acre golf course. These cause the potential for nutrient and chemical pollution in the water bodies from lawns and leakages from septic tanks. Therefore, we have recommended a couple of simple, action-based best management practices at the individual level to reduce pollution at the source. For example, proper application and timing of lawn care in the lawns in residential areas and the golf course in its entirety. Additionally, recommending proper septic tank management, for example, understanding the impacts of improper disposal within the system, as well as inspecting tanks every 3 to 5 years. The fine sandy loams of this area have a moderate drainage capacity, which is generally good for septic tanks. However, they also have a low nutrient retention capability. This means that if any leakages were to occur, then it would cause a greater potential for leaching into groundwater and eventually headwater streams. Therefore, our best bet is to reduce pollution from these sources at the source. The second component of this part is structure-based recommendations that focus more on the development itself. We recommend utilizing elements of low-impact development, or LID, which focuses on preserving the natural hydrology or cycling of water on the land, as well as at-source pollution management. Due to a limited budget and economic considerations, we have proposed 2 low-impact development practices that we believe that you should prioritize. The first of which are bioretention areas. These are shallow vegetated depressions in the land that help to retain runoff on site before it is slowly released into the water. These are also commonly known as rain gardens. We recommend utilizing native species such as blue flag iris and switchgrass, as they are more adapted to Mississippi's climate and are tolerant to flooding. According to the US EPA,
Bioretention areas are suited for a wide variety of land uses. Therefore, we propose that these bioretention areas could be utilized anywhere from commercial to residential to even recreational areas lining parks and playgrounds. Now, I'll transition it to Saya for more lit elements and their benefits.
Thank you, Iris. Our second recommendation is a stream site management zone. This would be a 50-foot forest buffer on either side of your stream and would be simple to implement as there is already a forest there. Moving on, I would now like to cover some benefits of these proposed BMPs. Our first benefit is that these would reduce runoff. Runoff carries various pollutants like sediment and nutrients into a water body. Therefore, reducing these would also reduce the pollutants that enter your water body, ultimately making your water clearer. Our second benefit is that it would reduce peak stream flows. By increasing infiltration from these BMPs, flooding will decrease, and the volume and velocity of water flow will also decrease, ultimately reducing stream bank erosion. These BMPs will also increase recreational opportunities. The implementation of these BMPs would increase access to green space, and by protecting water quality, ensure that your fish stay healthy for activities such as fishing. They would also create nice views for paddling and tourism, as instead of seeing muddy water and a random house, you see clear water and some nice green trees. Finally, these BMPs would protect downstream water quality, preserving Gulf sturgeon populations and protecting shrimp and oyster fisheries, as well as values of existing locals. Moving on, Angelina will now talk about part 3 of our plan, watershed-based strategies.
Thank you, Saya. It's important to know that management is most effective at the watershed level. That's why we recommend partnering with the surrounding communities and landowners to reduce more sources of non-point source pollution in a more comprehensive and effective way. We would also like to emphasize that adopting these practices is completely voluntary. However, these strategies have been shown to be effective, and there are several government incentives in place to help implement them. We have 2 main recommendations for the area surrounding your community. The first is field buffers for fields, pasturelands, and other working lands, and the second is prescribed fire for pine forests. So our first recommendation, field buffers, are borders of native vegetation around fields and pastures. These buffers will help filter runoff and absorb excess nutrients from cattle and chicken waste, preventing harmful algal blooms further downstream. Because they're made of native plants, they will also provide valuable wildlife habitat. And as Ira said, they're adapted to Mississippi's climate, so that means low maintenance costs. We will partner with the Crosby Arboretum to source these native species like maypop and big blue stem. And lastly, one incentive available to landowners is the Grassland Reserve Program, which is funded by the Natural Resource Conservation Service and offers cost sharing to improve grasslands. Our second recommendation is using prescribed fire to improve pine forest health. These low-intensity surface fires are natural and necessary for this ecosystem, maintaining it by preventing hardwoods from encroaching and replacing the pines. This restores the historical longleaf ecosystem, which provides habitat for hundreds of species, including the federally listed gopher tortoise, the rare red-cockaded woodpecker, and hundreds of plants in the diverse understory. Another major benefit is a reduced risk of wildfire for your future homes. Because of this region's historic policy of fire suppression, there has been a lot of fuel buildup and fire hazard that can be reduced through prescribed burning. And lastly, a healthier forest also means more timber harvest revenue and hunting opportunities. I would now like to hand it back to Saya for part 3 of our plan, long-term sustainability.
Thank you, Angelina. Our first long-term strategy is monitoring the water quality of the streams in and around this area. Now, why do we want to do this? We would like to do this to ensure that our plan is actually working and to identify potential problems before they become big enough that they are much harder to fix. According to Dr. Beth Baker from Mississippi State University, a good way to monitor water quality is through continuous monitoring with event-based sampling. This would set a baseline as well as identifying additional pollutants from stormwater runoff. we would like to propose monitoring upstream and downstream of your community to better identify changes if and when they happen, as well as monitoring for turbidity, dissolved oxygen, nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and bioindicators like macroinvertebrates. I will now turn it over to Danica for outreach.
Thank you, Saya. Our recommended outreach plan has multiple parts, but I would like to start by talking about the importance of listening and learning so that every voice is heard. Through town hall meetings and surveys, we recommend hearing the concerns of locals, farmers, and timber companies about the new development, as well as using this opportunity as a place to gather expertise and assist in voluntary implementation of BMPs such as field borders and prescribed burns. By getting to know these people on the ground, we build a community and become friendly faces instead of outsiders who are coming in and telling everybody else what to do. On our next slide, I'll talk about the importance of education and the promotion of recreation. We recommend working with the Piney Woods Conservation Group and Crosby Arboretum to educate community members on the importance of BMPs. Education is the first step to reducing public backlash against BMPs that may have undesirable effects, such as smoke from prescribed fire. However, once community members understand that prescribed fire helps reduce catastrophic wildfire that may threaten their livelihoods and their homes, they're usually much more receptive. Education is also the first step in spreading awareness and increasing participation in these crucial at-home practices that my colleague Iris mentioned earlier. We recommend emphasizing the role and individual ownership of each resident of the watershed, because every resident depends on clean water and has the ability to make an impact. We recommend working with the local community college to give citizens the opportunity to get more involved with monitoring. For example, creating a citizen science program to monitor turbidity and other water quality monitoring criteria that my colleague Saya mentioned earlier will improve resident understanding of water quality. Additionally, you could create water quality monitoring internships in partnership with the local community college that will focus on more complex monitoring components such as biomonitoring and nutrients. Lastly, we recommend promoting recreation in partnership with Crosby Arboretum and the Piney Woods Conservation Group to promote paddling, hunting, hiking, and fishing in the area so that every resident has access to green space and can enjoy the natural aesthetics of Mississippi. But how do we know if our plan is successful? We've outlined 4 measurements of success and adaptability. First is the preservation of natural hydrology, outstanding water resources, and ecosystems, which we will measure through monitoring. Second is participation in household level practices, citizen science, and recreation, which we will measure through surveys. Third is successful maintenance of BMPs, which we will gather through routine assessment. And fourth is positive feedback from interest groups, which we will gather through survey. We recommend being flexible and being able to change your approach as needed based off of data and feedback. This brings us to the end of our 3-part plan. However, we do have further considerations. And now, onto everybody's favorite part, laws and regulation. The Clean Water Act focuses on regulating point sources. However, our main concern is non-point source pollution, which is primarily controlled through voluntary control measures. This means that it's especially important to conduct outreach to protect outstanding water quality by promoting participation in those crucial at-home BMPs, such as proper septic tank and lawn care. Additionally, there is no existing municipality. Therefore, you all have the opportunity to leave room for low-impact development, or LID, in your development codes. Traditional codes can be overly prescriptive and don't allow for the necessary requirements for LID practices. However, by using inclusive language that allows for curb cuts, preservation of natural areas, and vegetative LID practices to account as landscaping requirements, you're one step closer to breaking down barriers to implementing LID. Now, onto costs with Iris.
Thank you so much, Danica. While development and construction does create a cost, let's look at some of the cost-benefit analysis for the other aspects of our plan. First, for our low-impact development elements, which include bioretention areas and that streamside management zone, these utilize the natural infiltration and filtration services of the land, reducing potential costs associated with mechanical water management structures, future pollutant cleanup in the water bodies themselves, as well as potential flooding damages. Additionally, according to the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality, utilizing low-impact development elements can reduce costs associated with site development and residential maintenance from up to 25 to 30%. Our monitoring program is crucial to long-term sustainability, as my colleague Saya mentioned earlier, and it's important to understand and know that our plan is achieving success and will continue to achieve its success in our water quality goals. And finally, our outreach programs are important for fostering connections between the community members in the area of interest and outside, ensuring that every voice is understood and heard. For some potential sources of revenue, this includes things like tourism of the water bodies and recreation, and the general local economic growth of the area due to businesses in that commercial plot. Additionally, things like our monitoring and outreach programs will create jobs, and overall maintaining and possibly even improving water quality would benefit downstream fisheries, and forestry management practices like my colleague Angelina mentioned earlier could help to protect assets of the forest and for timber companies. We also recommend applying for a Section 319 grant, which is a federal cost share program that provides funding for water quality management. I would now like to address a final cost, the cost of doing nothing. In a situation without considering the impact that development has on water quality, this would lead to severe degradation of water quality and not only impact aquatic health, but also recreation of the waters and the Pascagoula River, and also things like the downstream fisheries. Now here are our sources, and now onto Angelina for a conclusion.
Thank you, Iris. We hope that our three-part plan will help preserve and protect your watershed for today and for future generations. We look forward to working with you and will now answer any questions you may have.
Great job, ladies. Thank you for that. Y'all don't have any guys that want to be a part of your team?
We don't allow them.
You don't allow them, okay. Talk to me a little bit about, so we're talking about this big development that's going to come right inside this pristine community that's there. And you mentioned some of the ways that you were looking to mitigate things like lawns and so forth. What would you do to mitigate, and I didn't hear anything about how you would mitigate like fecal matter from pets and the lawns, the people out, taking their pets for walks in this brand new community. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, that could be included in a part of our outreach program, which my colleague Danica mentioned, where we would help residents, and that would be a part of the household level action-based things, where things like picking up after your pets and so just general outreach programs and understanding the impact that individual actions have on the general watershed.
So what does the phrase, "it begins at home," mean to you after putting together this presentation?
The phrase, "it begins at home," means that every resident of the community is responsible for the health of the watershed and has the power to make a difference. Because these small things, such as picking up your pet waste, managing your septic tank, or making sure that you don't dump toxic chemicals down the drain or in toilets, can make such a big impact on water quality, that means that every single person has the power to make a real difference.
Okay, wonderful job. My question is What part of the plan or which practice did y'all find most interesting or perhaps to have the potential most impact?
I would say it isn't a specific best management practice or some kind of land use. I would say it's actually working with all the interest groups, having open communication, and building our outreach programs. Because we can build a rain garden and it will filter some runoff. But as Danica said, if we're able to reach more people and more people start disposing of waste properly and just being aware of water health, then we'll be able to make a much larger difference.
We would also like to keep in We would also like to keep in mind balancing the outstanding resource waters that the Pascagoula River Basin is, as well as the values of the residents, both future and current.
I think a really big theme that we've all come across here is that it really does begin at home and with individual actions. I know we've all found really interesting the aspect of communication and the community that can arise from a project like this, and it really does start with the individuals and keeping an open mind and talking to the people in the area. You learn a lot more by listening than you do by talking.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I really like your approach. I like that it's direct. Congratulations. I'm going to hit you with a challenge. I am a developer that wants to put something in the city center. I want to be a business owner. I might not live in this community. How are you going to approach me and help inspire me to get on board with your plan for this community and the environmental protections you're trying to promote?
I would like to start by saying that every new development would have to pass through the town council. And currently there is no pre-existing municipality. However, the development project seems to be very green focused. So our future municipality would write development codes that would include LID practices and incentivize them so that developers are more likely to look into these LID practices and actually implement them. As well as when we are approving these plans when the town is approving these plans, that is the time for open communication between the town and the developers so that everybody is on the same page.
As far as your personal goals, we'd start by sitting down and having a conversation with you, what you want out of this, what we can do to get you on board. It really just does begin with communication. So in addition to the regulations and planning that Danica mentioned, we'd also want to talk to you as a potential interest holder.
So you did a great job of explaining kind of, low impact development strategies, best management practices, things like that. The place that you're developing in is very close to the Gulf of America, which has significant storm events, hurricanes, tropical depressions. Did you take into account the overwhelming sort of magnitude of what that would do to the community and also to your best management practices that you designed?
Of course. It's a good question. Well, first of all, a lot of our development strategies are actually used to help reduce the effects of climate events like thunderstorms and tropical depressions because they help reduce runoff that would have caused flooding in the streets. Also, as Iris said, we're using a lot of native plants, so they're already kind of used to all this rain, and they'll be able to survive through these storms and lower costs in general.
Additionally, one part about site development and an important part about site development and thinking about long-term sustainability, especially in times like now, is understanding hazard mitigation and the risk of hazards as you continue developing. So we'll be sure to keep that in mind as this project continues forward.
You mentioned there toward the end a grant. I think it was like 319 grant. What is that grant for, and what are you planning on utilizing a EPA Section 319 grant?
So the EPA's Section 319 grant is mostly used to help fund things like local water quality improvement projects. And it doesn't even have to be improvement. It can also be to in advance before development happens. So we would use funds from this grant, especially towards our low impact development elements like those bioretention areas and management of the streamside management zones.
So, one, I'd like to congratulate you on your innovative use of the graphic in the corner of the slides. It was very good, kept things tied together. But I'd ask you, what is the single most important word that you would say is required in any non-point source plan?
I would like to echo what my colleague Angelina said earlier. Communication is the most important thing here because people can't implement what they don't know about. So it's crucial that homeowners know what BMPs are out there, how they can help, and what they are able to do.
And with reference to our graphic, we want to make sure that you're communicating not just with future homeowners, but also with interest groups in the larger watershed as a whole as well. They are also interest groups in this plan, and we want to make sure that their voices are heard.
Talk about the golf course and what unique parts of a golf course has to make sure you don't have pollutants running off.
Okay, well, for golf course, well, if we imagine a golf course, it's going to be green grass, perfectly managed. So a big source that I alluded to earlier was pesticides and lawn management. So that's what we would think would be one of the biggest aspects of pollution from these golf courses. So by using our outreach and education program, we would be able to, and potentially even things like codes, we would be able to reduce the impact that those lawn care application actions would have on the water bodies.
We could also try to limit the use of golf carts to certain roads to ensure that there's not erosion everywhere and just on certain places that would be easier to manage.
All right, we'll take a 10-minute break if anyone needs to use the restroom. All right, folks, we're about ready for our third team presentation. If you would find your seats. So for our third and final oral presentation, we have team 2639. Let's give them a hand.
Stay here. Yeah.
Before we begin, may I introduce our team? Good evening. My name is Ruby, and these are my teammates, Bina, Declan, Evelyn, and Nicole. Famous author and Mississippi native William Faulkner once observed that to understand the world, you must first understand a place like Mississippi. These words reflect not only the diversity of Mississippi's people and communities, but also their long-standing relationship with the region's abundant natural resources. One such resource is the Pascagoula River, a pristine, diverse water body defined by its status as the single unregulated major river system in the continental United States. The Shared Future Community Partnership will be developed on a tributary of this river, providing large-scale, affordable housing while sustaining recreation and the quality of the surrounding environment. However, without proper management, the proposed development stands as a threat to the Pascagoula River's diverse ecosystems. You have tasked us with developing a comprehensive strategy to reduce residential non-point source pollution on both a watershed and a community scale. Accordingly, we have developed the Clean Waters Plan, where WATERS is an acronym for the 6 integral goals of our management strategies. Working together, assessment of natural resources, taking action, environmental conservation, responsible economics, and sociocultural benefits.
The first major goal is working together collaboratively with affected interest groups. To achieve this, we must first identify these stakeholder groups and their concerns. On a watershed scale, agricultural producers are wary of new regulations and prefer voluntary best management practices, while members of the forestry industry are concerned with protecting assets such as streamside management zones and retired working land. In the Shared Future Development area, recreation users are concerned with access and safety of paddling trails. Additionally, existing community members are wary of the impact of new development on their homes and community, while future homeowners look to prioritize affordability, access to green space, and walkability of the new community. Local business leaders are very interested in growing tourism, improving aesthetics, and achieving flood attenuation. Once interest groups have been identified, we recommend establishing a steering committee comprised of representatives from each interest group. This committee will meet regularly to hear concerns and allow stakeholders to have direct input in watershed management strategies, prioritizing BMPs, and setting goals. The US EPA has found that involving stakeholders early in the planning process leads to stronger watershed management strategies, more effective policies, and broader community support.
Now that we have addressed the concerns of stakeholders, our second major goal is assessment of natural resources. According to the Wildlife Habitat Council, this will provide critical baseline data for local ecosystems and allow communities to make important land use decisions. Across the watershed, a mosaic of longleaf pines and mixed hardwoods provides a dynamic landscape. Much of the site to be developed consists mainly of second growth pine systems with an open structure. However, if left unmanaged, these sites will be slowly overtaken by hardwoods, and the stand will lose its early successional nature. The watershed soils are characterized by erosive sandy loams, whose limited nutrient retention also results in swift leaching of nutrients. The Pascagoula itself is listed as an outstanding Mississippi water, providing exceptional ecological and recreational value. Both fisheries and the rare Gulf sturgeon rely on the river's exceptional quality. In addition, the longleaf pine ecosystems provide habitat for the federally listed gopher tortoise and the red cockaded woodpecker, as well as hundreds of other species, such as the black pine snake and dusky gopher frog.
Once assessment has been completed, our third major goal is taking action to address non-point source pollution during planning, construction, and long-term community use within the watershed. Before construction, we recommend designing a monitoring program to determine baseline data. Monitoring should be done weekly and with every storm event. The sampling of chemical and biological data to track short and long-term changes will ensure an accurate description of the changes our actions may create. Within the watershed, soil sampling will also give farmers a better understanding of how fertilizers and nutrient leaching can impact water quality. Since many plant and animal species depend on fire-controlled ecosystems to complete their life cycles, we recommend that controlled burns are reinstated as a forestry management practice. This action requires great care and must be supervised by a licensed burn manager. Using spot or backfires is a safe and effective way for landowners to diversify habitat types on their property. Burning also reduces the amount of standing fuel, thus mitigating the risk of catastrophic fires that could do damage or destroy structures.
On a community level within the development, we suggest that planning includes a series of measures to prevent non-point source pollution. To begin with, we recommend identifying critical areas, habitats, riparian areas, and erosion risk areas to be protected. A development of a green grid of LEDs in the design will include natural depressions and biofiltration cells to keep water on site. For the shopping centers, we recommend permeable pavement on parking lots and rain gardens, and rain gardens on the side to filter runoff. Swales and native warm season grasses on the slopes of the golf course will reduce runoff from short turf grass. Moreover, we recommend that the 4 R's of nutrient management be followed, especially on the golf course. That is, right rate, right time, right place, and right source, according to the Soil Quality Institute. This will ensure an effective but not excessive application of fertilizers. Additionally, community open space will be preserved through parks and trails, allowing residents to enjoy the natural beauty of the local area.
The next area to address is the construction phase. On a watershed scale, nutrient management and riparian buffers are important for reduction of large-scale non-point source pollutants. Recommended species include bald cypress, water oak, willows, and shrubs such as the wax myrtle or chokeberry. These will both hold soil in place and provide aesthetics for the residents of the shared future community partnership. Fencing livestock out of waterways, utilizing conservation or mulch tillage, and maintaining or stabilizing stream crossings are highly necessary best management practices. These will aid in soil stabilization and avoid water contamination, further protecting water quality. Forestry practices within the watershed should focus on maintaining proper roads and stream crossings while providing erosion prevention measures. Ensuring water quality protection across the watershed will offset any pollutants that may occur during development of construction. Within new development, construction best management practices should also be followed. These include pollutant mitigation strategies such as silt fencing, rerouting stormwater away from cleared and unstable soils, and rapid revegetation with warm season grasses on bare areas. It is vital that contaminated water remains on site for treatment. We recommend utilizing detention basins that make sure that sediments can be settled out of contaminated water before it is released back into the watershed. To remediate any possible erosion or sedimentation caused by large machinery, the Mississippi State University Extension recommends implementing 150-foot buffers around any construction project stabilizing site entrances and exits, and avoiding clear cutting within 100 to 200 feet of the stream.
Once construction is completed, the last area to address is constant watershed protection. To achieve this, Dr. Beth Baker of the Mississippi State University Extension suggests that monitoring should continue in order to inform adaptive management strategies. Buffers will have to be maintained to prevent stream degradation, while continued fire management will ensure future biodiversity. BMPs for both forestry and agriculture should continue to provide data for watershed scale protection. With the shared future community development, multiple small-scale controls will help ensure long-term sustainability. Planting climate-smart lawn trees, such as the southern magnolia, eastern redbud, and dogwood, will provide effective pollution buffers while adding aesthetic value to the property. Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality suggests inspecting and maintaining private septic systems every 2 to 5 years to prevent failure and nutrient leaching. Soil testing for lawns and maintaining pet waste disposal areas will reduce bacterial and nutrient inputs. Continued management of forested areas and communal open spaces will ensure that early successional species prevent hardwood encroachment and create continued biodiversity.
Our fourth major goal is environmental conservation. Forests are critical to supporting diverse ecosystems and must be preserved. To encourage desirable regeneration, our plan utilizes controlled burns, which aid in maintaining early successional habitat and protect forested community open spaces. Utilizing forest and harvest best management practices, such as leaving slash, will prevent erosion, while adding organic matter and nutrients, creating healthy, resilient forests. Healthy soils play a crucial role in stabilizing landscapes and cycling water and nutrients. Our suggested construction best management practices prevent soil loss and minimize compaction. Using native warm season grasses will also improve soil structure and increase productivity. This will benefit the soil nutrient holding capacity, reducing the need for synthetic fertilizers, mitigating leaching issues, and protecting groundwater. Improved nutrient retention capacities will allow the soil to properly use and transport nutrients from septic systems, absorbing them completely before they can reach water bodies. Increased biological productivity in the soil will improve plant growth in pasture lands too.
Our plan protects water quality by increasing infiltration, preventing erosion and sedimentation, and reducing nutrient pollution. Utilizing low-impact development measures that encourage infiltration allows water to be purified by soils as well as plant roots. This will also increase groundwater recharge, resulting in a stable base flow, which will benefit aquatic organisms. Detention systems prevent flashy runoff, reducing erosive capacity of stormwater, and buffers of native vegetation ensure sheet flow, preventing channelization while increasing filtration. To protect the area's unique wildlife, our buffers provide corridors, giving places for animals to move and reducing fragmentation. Use of fire will maintain longleaf and loblolly pine habitat of the dusky gopher frog, the red cockaded woodpecker, and the gopher tortoise, as well as the hundreds of species that utilize its extensive burrows. Burns will also create early successional habitat for species such as the Louisiana black bear and Mississippi sandhill crane. While maintaining excellent water quality will also protect aquatic organisms, prevent damage to fisheries, and protect the habitat of the Gulf sturgeon. Riparian buffers shade streams, cooling temperatures and increasing dissolved oxygen levels needed for survival. Additionally, native warm season grasses provide food and shelter for birds and small mammals, while planting native flowering plants and rain gardens will provide food for pollinators.
Since the Nature Conservancy has found that long-term feasibility depends heavily on economic viability, our fifth major goal is responsible economics. A major cost of implementing our plan is the construction of rain gardens or bioretention cells. We estimate that this will cost around $500,000. Additionally, consulting expenses for construction will amount to $15,000. Similarly, assessment of the site will cost around $50,000, while the cost of bringing in a prescribed burn manager is around $3,000 per year. Finally, the website and social media messaging will cost around $5,000 to develop. Therefore, we estimate that our plan will incur costs of up to $1 million over the next 10 years. Based on our calculations for the shared future community partnerships, we expect the total cost for the Pascagoula watershed to be around $9 million.
However, protecting this invaluable natural resource will provide both economic as well as environmental benefits. Some of these benefits include reduced flooding, stormwater, and drinking water treatment costs. The United States Environmental Protection Agency has also found that utilizing LID measures and green infrastructure can raise property values by 10 to 15%. Additionally, our recommended BMPs are expected to reduce infrastructure repair costs by 30 to 60% in the long term.
To fully appreciate these benefits, we must first consider the cost of doing nothing. Failure to address non-point source pollution will allow pollutant levels to increase unchecked in both groundwater and surface waters. The resulting degradation of regional water quality will have negative consequences on human and environmental resources that are costly, far-reaching, and often irreversible. In fact, the US EPA estimates that addressing environmental damage costs are 40 to 80 times more expensive than preventative measures. Therefore, by investing in watershed best management practices and proactively protecting the aquatic ecosystems of the Pascagoula River, we can reduce these damage costs, save millions of taxpayer dollars, and strengthen the local economy.
To increase the overall feasibility of our plan, implementation should be phased, beginning with high-impact, low-cost measures, such as education, voluntary best management practices, planning, and monitoring. This will reduce total pollutant loads while allowing for more strategic funding for long-term, more costly actions. To further reduce costs, volunteers and citizen scientists can be recruited, and a variety of environmental funds are available to aid in the cost share.
The effectiveness and long-term sustainability of pollution reduction relies heavily on how we address the sociocultural issues related to it. Therefore, the sixth and final goal of our Clean Waters Plan is maintaining sociocultural benefits. One important consideration is ensuring that our plan aligns with political mandates and government agencies. Because local governments influence land use decisions, we recommend inviting representatives to participate in our steering committee. This will ensure alignment with local and state conservation priorities while maintaining transparency and public support. Municipal governments should incorporate LID strategies into zoning regulations. In compliance with state and federal governments, the plan follows the 6 steps as outlined by the Mississippi Department of Environmental Protection and includes the EPA's 9 minimum elements. Burning recommendations will comply with the Mississippi Prescribed Burn Act by working with a burn manager.
To further ensure sociocultural benefits, our plan has identified and addressed the concerns of interest groups. Our recommended BMPs will maintain ecological interests and public safety. In addition, paddling trails have been protected for recreationalists. This will also ensure continued tourism for local businesses, while conservation design and community open space maintain aesthetics for current and future residents. To ensure that future stakeholder concerns are identified, the steering committee should continue to hold meetings where members can voice problems, update goals, track progress, and address any other issues that may arise.
According to the EPA, an informed, involved, and supportive public is the foundation of water protection. To maintain this foundation, we recommend strengthening partnerships such as the Weyerhaeuser Corporation, the Crosby Arboretum, and the MSU Extension. These groups provide technical assistance and are invaluable in community engagement efforts. Use of social media, a water quality dashboard, and a website will allow stakeholders to join in the decision-making process and voice their concerns. These sites can also provide information on green development strategy incentives, such as reduced stormwater, utility fees, and the reforestation tax credit. According to Dr. Baker of the MSU Extension, community programs such as drain marking campaigns and citizen science monitoring can empower residents to become active stewards of their local waterways. When the shared future community is completed, we hope that residents of the watershed will participate in a traditional Southern barbecue to celebrate and explore the protection of the watershed. Learning kits should also be assembled and distributed to local schools, showcasing the protection of the Pascagoula River and the success of a well-managed development.
These 6 schools create a framework that can serve as a long-term model of environmental stewardship while successfully protecting water quality, both for current and future residents of the great state of Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I usually start and ask a couple of questions. That was wow. You answered both of my questions that I've asked the other groups. And I love your budget. You had a lot of expenses. Tell me a little bit about your thought process on where you're going to get the dollars to address the expenses that you put in your budget.
So we understand that there's limited funding available for this development, but we hope that whoever's funding the development itself will be willing to put some money towards things like buffers and rain gardens and detention basins, because those things are invaluable, and as we mentioned, will have benefits in the future, such as increased property values, lowered infrastructure repair costs and the like, and lower drinking water costs.
So as we mentioned, public outreach is going to be key in implementing our plan. As Declan mentioned, we do have a limited budget, but education is almost free. So if we can educate the public, including the stakeholders we mentioned, on both a watershed and a community scale, we can hopefully engage them, including in citizen science monitoring, where they themselves can participate in monitoring the water bodies and therefore become engaged and supportive of our plan.
Given a situation where we wouldn't have the funding to implement everything, we could, for instance, reduce monitoring sites and change that from once weekly to once every 2 weeks. And while that wouldn't be ideal, that would cut down on funding. We could also rather spend more money on riparian buffers and reduce some of the LID costs, because those were some of our most expensive costs. However, a lot of that is being developed anyways. And the community is spending money to develop that land. So incorporating those BMPs, we got our costs from the EPA's watershed handbook, and they wrote those costs for retrofits. So our costs, especially for things like rain gardens, for LID practices, are likely to be a lot higher because they're not being installed after the fact. They're being installed directly into management as part of that development process.
Additionally, our plan is going to be phased, meaning that it will start with the lower cost actions which will have the highest impact. Education is going to be a big part of that, because education comes with a relatively low cost, but is going to have a very far-reaching impact even outside of the watershed. Additionally, there are many different grants which will be able to help with the funding, such as the Community Development Grants, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grants. And these will all help to cost share this program.
So, based upon the special topic in the oral presentation development you've done, what does the term "it begins at home" mean to you?
Watersheds have to be managed on a residential scale, because without everyone participating in watershed management, we won't see any improvements at all, or in this case, any prevention measures. Most of the people in the watershed could be doing everything right, and then there's one family or one neighborhood that's putting all this stuff into the water, and all their efforts are in vain. So it begins at home. We took that to mean each resident is responsible for the quality of the watershed, and everyone has to do their part, and whether that means attending information sessions, spreading the word about water quality, picking up trash, or planting a tree in your backyard. Everyone can take low-cost steps, and if you are willing, you could take costlier steps, but everyone can do something to protect the watershed.
A big part of this is going to be educating people. So as we mentioned, we're going to host a barbecue, which is going to help to educate people. We will also use storm drain markings, which is where you go out with your family or friends and you can mark a storm drain and you can mark it and it says, please don't dump waste in here. You can decorate it with however you like, and it helps you to feel more connected and more a part of the program that you are protecting this watershed.
As previously mentioned, most people do care, and the people who are causing most of the problems are that very low percentage that don't care, and that can be a problem because getting them on our side is going to be much more difficult than raising the awareness of the people who are already invested. So what we've done is we've included some incentives that are already in place and then also that could be put in place. This is like stormwater utility cost reductions. And those things have been tried in other areas and they work very effectively to bring those people onto the team because even if they don't care about the environment, they're going to care about their money.
So I wanted to take a moment to envision this traditional Southern barbecue. I missed lunch. I missed lunch today, so it's really high on my mind. But I wanted to think about the groups that you are bringing to the table, literally, for this meeting. The area that you're proposing to build within is considered to be a natural jewel within the state of Mississippi. On the other hand, you have economic interests that probably have invested a lot of money in trying to get this project off the ground. How do you propose to allow everyone to be heard, allow everyone to voice without everybody flipping the tables over at the barbecue when they get there? So in other words, how do you propose to ease into this to where people are, it's not a screaming match, it's an actual logical conversation?
The first goal of our plan was working together with stakeholders and affected interest groups in the area, and we recommended that they establish a steering committee where anyone who wants is invited to regular meetings to discuss goals and discuss how water quality is progressing, and that is where they can talk with each other and all the interest groups can meet, and if they have to make trade-offs, which we haven't identified any that they have to make yet, they could make trade-offs there, and then at something like a barbecue, they could just appreciate the water quality rather than getting grumpy with each other.
The steering committee is also going to include stakeholders from the entire watershed as well as just the proposed development because it is important that the water quality of the entire Pascagoula watershed is preserved.
You had a really interesting approach to your plan and, dare I say, strategic. So how did you come up with this particular approach to present your overall plan?
So in designing our plan, we really wanted to look at all the parts, as mentioned in your scenario you presented with us. So when we sat down to write this, we wanted to not only cover the environmental aspects, but also the people involved, the wildlife, the economic parts. And in doing so, we came up with this acronym in order to cover all the bases and therefore successfully incorporate them all into our plan.
It has a ring to it.
Is it on? As someone who has spent the majority of her professional career doing watershed planning and stakeholder engagement, I want to congratulate you on hitting some of the most salient points that gets professionals doing outreach kind of in a pinch at times. So one of the things that I've always said is if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, right? So you have to address that. Congratulations, you did a fantastic job with that and your references for that. I do want to talk to you a little bit about your approach for using maybe the opportunity to have a new development, potentially a new municipality, and how you can use that governance structure to potentially outline community standards that would help address some of the concerns of all of your stakeholders.
So we know that once this community is developed, they will develop their own government as well. And therefore, we realize it is very important to get zoning requests in there so that as they zone, they can incorporate LID measures and conservation design measures that will effectively protect the water quality in the future.
So like Evie mentioned, we want to work with that new government. Maybe we invited local governments already to the steering committee, but as soon as that new government's formed, they would also be there. And yeah, things like green grid and LID measures should be incorporated in that zoning law so that new developments have to incorporate those things and they don't undo whatever we managed to preserve with this plan.
One very interesting approach that could be used to help people to encourage this kind of low-impact development and get it into the legislation is using a housing density bonus, where if you do use LID and you do use conservation design, you can add a certain number of houses, I mean, in a settlement like this, maybe 2 or 3, to the settlement than previously mentioned without it, because the stormwater costs and the utility costs and the impacts will come down based on that design.
Additionally, Dr. Baker, as you mentioned when you were presenting the scenario, the Pascagoula River is actually an outstanding water body, meaning that we cannot add any more pollutants. So as these new developers are coming in and wanting to just get the project over with, well, actually, they can't just do that. They have to respond and utilize these BMPs that we're recommending when they are developing the site.
So I'm going to digress a little bit here. This Dr. Baker, she's really something else, isn't she? I've been around her for a good while and actually been her neighbor, and she's a pretty great lady. The barbecue has me totally infatuated, especially a southern barbecue, and maybe I'm thinking about some of the things that you're going to plan to share at this barbecue, especially with it being a southern barbecue. We have certain beverages that are a little bit, like Coca-Cola. We all like our Coca-Cola, and then there's something that Kentucky produces as well that's pretty fabulous. And then, but everybody likes a little Guinness with their Kentucky barbecue. So, no, y'all done a great job. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said all that, but I love the way you presented it, and I don't have anything else. I will be the MC tonight for the award ceremony, so maybe I can come up with some of those items for myself. So,
Appreciate that.
I'd just like to compliment you on your use of the acronym, and as a hydrologist, I appreciate the word you chose also. And I just ask you, if you have one word that you would say is fundamental, and this is a giveaway question almost, one word that's fundamental to any 9-point source plan, what would it be?
Water, because without it, you don't have non-point source pollution.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I have a quick, just a few quick reminders real quick before we get out of here. We will have our closing ceremony at 7 o'clock tonight in this room. So we look forward to seeing you back there. And are there any questions or any housekeeping items that we need to mention before we get out? All right. See y'all in a few hours. Thank you.